podcast listeners, if you hear my voice right now, I need you to do something for me. I want you to take out your phone or on your computer, go to Apple Podcasts, search for Ask Your Oldhead Podcast. You'll see my logo, my little picture, my little image there. Find the show. Please rate and write a review. It's a small thing, but it helps others find this work and find what I'm doing here. And it really, really matters, as small as that may seem. So if you could please do that before we get into the show, I would much appreciate it. Thank you for listening. Let's get into it. Peace. You are listening to Good Brothers. Let's get into the show. Peace. I'm Majestic.
Peace, my brother. What's happening?
Man, it's another day. It's another wonderful day in Zamunda or something like that.
Yes, sir.
So I think we came to the decision to maybe spin away from current events, so to speak.
Yeah, man.
And some other things, and tap into some reading and thinking, and what's so. I'll pitch to you. Maybe just ask the first question on the reading, and then we'll work our way through these. Through a little bit of reading material, some books and whatnot.
Yeah. No, and I think it's important during this time, especially because it's like it can be so easy to get into kind of like everything that's happening and not get into yourself. And periodicals are good, but they're like constant updates. They're not like the deep updates, right? Where I would look at like reading and certain things that we learn is like the deep updates to like what's important to us. And so I do think it's important, especially with the current inhabitant of the White House, who has learned that if he gives people so much information, nothing means anything. Right? And that's the thing I think people have to really remember. Like, homie has figured out how to give you so much information, nothing means nothing.
Yeah. It's like, how can you track what thing is, it's the, I think somebody I saw last night, like the con man is the key is to never stop talking.
Right.
Like, if you never stop talking, I can't break your rhythm.
No.
To escape.
And you don't recognize what's true and what's false because I just kept talking. Now we're debating what we're talking about, right? There was a cadence to information for a long time that got totally obliterated, which is a different conversation. But yeah, like there's no cadence to information no more, right? There's no cadence to data. There's no cadence to knowledge. It's like shit's coming from everywhere. And it's your job to figure out how to engage with it. And, for a lot of us, that's a tough thing. So it's good for us to kind of take a step back from the world as we're existing in to actually talk about the things that fuel us.
Yeah. So, I think we lead off with a recent read. So I could go first, and I didn't think of any like real specific questions about the reading, but I think we'll just see where it goes. So earlier this summer, maybe I can't remember exactly when I finished, but I read QuestLove's The Creative Quest.
Okay.
And I had been sitting on it for a little while, and I finally got around to putting it in so I could read it, and it was really the thing I took out of it for me was like listening to someone talk about creating and how you make, something, right? But the, sort of breaking it away from the idea of just like, oh, the creative genius and the, it wasn't like a dissection of some kind of magical thing about being creative. We have a tendency in this society to make a like an idol out of people. And go, oh man, it's just the mystery of it all. And it wasn't that though. It was like, here's how I approach creative stuff, and here's though how I've tried to understand how other people create stuff, and then how, figuring out what works for you or what works for me or what works for anyone, and is important. And so like the the tone and the energy of the book was very like inspiring, like, I'm saying, around any creative endeavors that you want endeavors to write or read or speak or make houses or something, I don't know, right. Whatever creative thing one is partaking in,
right.
Yeah, I'm saying, make some geodesic domes and I'm saying, and move to Wyoming or
though I do have to say, I don't know if we're going to talk about that. I do have to say, man, I have a new appreciation for some things, but we'll get into that. So Wyoming is kind of intense, but I get where, I ain't gonna get into Kanye, but he's definitely like your cousin that, like, he's on to something, but the application of it doesn't always come out like you're looking, but like he's on to something, so you always want to support what he's doing because there is something deeper there, but his manifestation of it being deeper just doesn't always get to the conclusion yet.
Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't always land. And it's actually I'm trying to, we came up with this. I was saying I have time to like go thumb back through all of my thoughts, on the text. But I know one of the things that prominently stood out in there was the whole section where he talks about him as a drummer and him trying to going on a deep dive on different drummers.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? And it's fascinating, because he's talking about, well, this drummer does this and the styles, and and it's something that we often talk about, like the value of sort of the deep investigation of something and really pulling something apart and applying that to your personal self, right? And how you approach the world or your own thinking. And I think sometimes, to me, the way people will interpret the idea of mindfulness is this sort of being, a sense of awareness or density of detail, but not always, but almost like people is doing it, but they don't really want to go too deep. Where, I think one of that section, that chapter really, because there's always with creating something and doing something, and I like to think of creativity in a broad sense, not just like creative products, so to speak, or like making art or something that is, but being creative in the way you approach things, being creative in your professional world, whatever the world that is. But there's a tendency, there's a place where when you're trying to think, what to do next or what to step out into, which may not be fully formed, where there's a self-doubt that comes up, right? And that that's again depending on your orientation. Some people experience no self-doubt. They're just like, hey, whatever good thing I thought of is good, I'm going, right? Right, like some people like they came right out there with that outfit on, or like, they said that what they said, and you were like, well, all right, well, he said it, there you go. But by having the almost parsing between what's you and what's the other, and then what that you've maybe taken in that is now yours, right? But that you may have, you definitely picked up from the other things that you've experienced or the other worlds you've moved in. But finding, some peace and stability with that, where you've maybe added your own flavor, your own, self-styled, energy to what's going on. And like that's a part of figuring out how you create is more important than understanding creativity like in this abstract, objective way over there. It's like, right. You got to understand how you do some stuff. So that was my my recent read. It gave me something, especially during the pandemic, to to ponder and to walk with.
Okay. So for me, I'm gonna take a little bit of two things. One, I'm not quite finished yet, but it's interesting. And one, I'm finished and it was interesting. One is The No Rules Rules, Netflix and the Cultural Reinvention by Reed Hastings and Erin Meyer. And, Netflix just had an issue with their quarterly earnings, but, every company has ups and downs, right? Part of it is the idea is that, like, we always assume Netflix is going to be so on point that, like, when they can't get 3 million new followers, we say that they're not performing. Okay. So it's kind of like the bar of expectation, like the LeBron James theory, right? Like, at some point, homie produces such a high level that if he doesn't do what he did last time and more, we think he's not good.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, you just set a real high level for homie. Like, it gets real difficult for him to go over. But for Netflix, it talks about, like, the cultural reinvention and that, going back to Jack Welch and all these folks, and actually Peter Drucker before that with management and leadership, there's always this conversation about who's the right way to lead. And it's interesting about Netflix is, like, they're clear. Like, don't run your company like ours. Right? Like, in the words Slick Rick, hey, little kids, don't follow these dopes. Like, don't play around with us, because we don't tell people how much the vacation they got. We get rid of mugs and they're just slightly better than okay. Right? Like, we do stuff that, like, you probably shouldn't do at a certain company, but we bought into it. And this is what we're doing. Right? Like, for example, one of the chapters is freedom from vacation policy adds value, even if no one uses it. Right? And so for a lot of folks who are used to structure and understandably, like, listen, man, I need to know how much time I got. Right? They need to know the parameters. Where Netflix's perspective is, we need people who don't operate by parameters. We need you to understand the rules, because you can't break the rules, because we ain't going to jail, right? Because that's the Uber conversation, which is another dialogue. Like, but we need people who understand the rules. But then once they understand the rules, then they can play in an interesting space, inside of that. So I'm not going to tell you how much vacation you got. You got as much vacation as you want, but what work got to get done, right? And here's the thing. If you're operating at a person that's making 6 and maybe 7 figures, you know how much time you can go on vacation and you can't. If you don't know yourself that well by then, you're in the wrong job.
Yeah.
Right? You don't get to be the COO or the CFO of Netflix and don't know how much time you get to do your work. Or that you got to take a call when you're on vacation.
Right.
So it's just interesting. That's counterintuitive to the idea of how much we think about. Now, municipal government is a lot different. You can't kind of do that kind of same stuff. But I just think it's interesting to think about those things with leadership and counterintuitive thinking.
Oh yeah. Well, I think, and I remember, I've heard about that structure in a couple business, like the idea that it's like, yeah, you off if you need 3 days for man, just get your project done, right? And if your work aligns that way, that would be an interesting space to work in. I mean, working in human services and with people, like, you need to have, some degree of, adaptability, because you might not, so that the people who you are working with that will be calling you to be available, so they know when you're available.
Right.
But I've always been an advocate of, if you can get the work that is repeatable, your sort of routine that you have to do, if it's like data entry or process type parts of your work, if you can make sure that work does not become a hindrance, so that when that you're not always running up to the meter, so to speak, right? Where it's like, oh man, it's the end of the quarter, I gotta catch up on all the things, because I wasn't, I didn't have a system in place where when I'm ready to do this, I could just pull all the stuff out and boom. you know, I think, and I think that there's an interesting tension there too with like, because you find sometimes when you give people a lot of, when people are used to being like managed very closely, and then you put them in space like, well, here's the time, here's the frames, like do this and make sure it's between these hours, and you know, document this and this, and then I'm gonna check in, you know, on Thursday. And then some people they don't do good. They feel like they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, even if they're doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, because they're like, wait, I mean, nobody's really, like you just said that, but I've heard, but you know, you're not really gonna come check on me. And like, no, I'm not. Like, I'm trusting you to do what you're supposed to be doing, and we're gonna talk on Thursday. So go do it. Go
Right.
do the stuff. Like, yeah, I mean, but or is the no rules rules?
The no rules rules. Netflix and the culture reinvention. And another book that I've been reading is, I guess, another part of my brain is Haruki Murakami. And it's called What I Talk About When I Talk About Running. And it's interesting because it's like a book that's his meditations on how he got into running. But like Murakami is an amazing creative writer. So it's like not a structured book of like, and here's how you get ready for this race. It's like he's telling you how he felt when he ran on the beach, and how he felt at the 18th mile, and what did he see as change in his own life, and what did he see change around him, and how did his art get better. And what it does, it talks about the fact of when things change, you change. And it's really a meditation on what does it mean to change, right? And have a medium by which you are actually making life changes. And as being someone getting into running, I can appreciate how you start to change when the things that you're doing change. And then what does that mean? So definitely for anybody, not just with running, but any particular thing, I definitely would support what I talk about when I talk about running by Haruki Murakami.
Dope. I think I got a hot tip on reading one of his novels. I think it's the same.
He's a very, really accomplished novelist. This is just his book about running.
I have to check him out.
Yeah.
Do not to that. So, cool. So my next one on the I don't remember what if I said. I said a favorite that I go back to. And I haven't started reading this year yet because my books are still in boxes at the moment. Is the Xenogenesis trilogy, Octavia Butler.
Okay.
You know, which is Dawn. Was it? Sometimes I forget the other parts because I read it the first time as all three books together. So in my brain, it's all one book and not three books.
Gotcha.
I think it's Dawn, Lilith's Brood, and Imago. And the whole, you know, spoiler alert. You know what I'm saying? If you ain't never read the book, I ain't gonna tell all the details, but you know what I'm saying? I'm gonna share a little bit. But why it's a book that I enjoy rereading is, you know, the story is, you know, about basically humanity's encounter with aliens, with alien intelligence, alien life forms, but also after basically, you know, a nuclear apocalypse. You know what I'm saying? And these, you know, it's these aliens, you know, encounter the Earth and are trying to revive, you know, the humans and the other living material that is the Earth. And the whole story arc of the three novels goes through sort of what these beings are, and like presents this like just all these different alternatives about how life could be structured. And you know, and then there's things in there, you know, obviously that are resonant of the time that it came out of, which is the late 80s, and you know, Cold War era. And you know, there's a lot of stuff that I mean, I guess I'll keep a little bit secret, but you know, there's a lot of the storyline deals with hierarchy like humans kind of tendency to create hierarchy and but then also like how we like sort of this individualism that we also have at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
and like how these two energies combat each other. I'm messing up specifically the way it's stated in the text because I haven't read the text in a minute. But since last year, but it's always it's a world building wise. It's like, yeah, I'm saying it's a fantastic world. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, snaps, like aliens. It's like life forms, tentacles and shit. And motherfucking, like, you know what I mean? It's like a spaceship, but it's like a planet. It's like the planet is a spaceship and it's like moving through the world, the galaxy or something. And yeah, I mean, it's a whole different way of thinking about life and space. And I think, especially where typically we, a lot of our science fiction sort of framing of like is like spaceships and then and big weapons and stuff, and like there's power and dynamics and all that stuff in there, but there's not really like a war. It's not a war concept.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? In the way that the story plays out, what's happening with the transition that's occurring with this encounter, right?
Gotcha.
And which is something that I think is the assumption that there always will be certain like conflict is sort of something that we're trained to be comfortable with in our society, and so like the alien entities trying to understand these people who have some fascinating things about them, and so they're intriguing to the alien peoples, like how these people lived in their planet and the other types of life that was on the planet. But then they're also like, they're like, man, how could they have these things and how could they do this to themselves? Like, they're like, how do they do this to themselves? Like, we found you basically had destroyed yourself.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like, you charge your planet. Like, you know what I mean? So that's I think it's a great, you know what I'm saying? You gonna be in the crib and you want to immerse yourself in something, and be a little challenge. There's some challenging pieces to it. I think it's a good read.
So one thing I think to that point is there's an interesting conversation around like the reimagining of things, right? And I think there's a really important conversation around what does it mean to reimagine and how do you give yourself the space to reimagine, which I'll say a lot of folks don't give themselves the space to reimagine.
Yeah.
So there's an interesting balance between those, including myself sometime in the past, who didn't give myself a lot of space to reimagine, but also felt like we were accountable for the lives of people. And sometimes the people who are like, let's reimagine it. It's like, you're right, we should, but there are people who still need something today. And while you could say in the broader sense, you should reimagine it so they get something, they have expectations, real or, however you perceive it, right? They need things today. Mm-hmm. So while you're thinking about reimagining it, you still have to deal with this often dysfunctional system as it exists. But I do think there's a powerful, powerful place in being able to kind of reimagine and get our brains and our minds outside of what we're used to receiving.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, wanted to definitely say that. For me, the old one that I've returned to recently, are kind of keeping in this model, 2 books, but the 2 books by the same person. One, the author is Claude Brown, and Man, Child, and the Promised Land, one, which I would say is his epic, his like just genius production. And then the second one is Children of Ham, which isn't talked about nearly as much as Man, Child, and the Promised Land, because Man, Child, and the Promised Land was his life, and then Children of Ham was him writing about others, and specifically writing about kids in the Bronx in 1977 and 78.
Oh, word.
So, Man Child of Promised Land, again, is an epic. It's like his seminal performance. And I would say up there with Invisible Man, up there with any of Baldwin's work to me, just about how clear and communicative he was around what it meant for him to grow up and transition out of what he was into what he became. And so for that, it's amazing, but we often like those stories. Like we like the El Hajj from Lee Shabazz, Malcolm X, right? We like the story, the education of Sonny Carson, right? There's something that we like this process. But then when you start writing these other books, it's talking about how, like, frankly, fucked up the world was. People don't like those as much, right? Because there's no good guy, right? There's no one person gets through the trouble and then makes it work. It's kind of like, this is fucked up. And guess what? It's probably going to be fucked up for the foreseeable future. So, okay, enjoy, right? Like, and no one likes to have that story, right? We don't like to have that story of like, so is nothing we can do about this? Nah. You know what I mean? Like, and so from an urbanism perspective, I think this idea of what happened to the Bronx, particularly in the same time that we now know it for being a hotbed for culture and for Black and brown interaction, is interesting because with everything that came out of the positives of hip hop, there was also this space of, so we have this borough that besides certain parts of it have essentially been left for dead. Right? And it's tough when you get to saying that a city has essentially just been left and no one cares about it. Right? Like we had that with Detroit a little bit, right? Like just parts of Detroit that you like, okay, so you're just not gonna come and clean up? No, we're not. Right?
Like, we're just gonna we're
not gonna get those basic public services that we all are part of our kind of agreement, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nah, we're not gonna do that.
We're just gonna let it be what it be. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
like, you gotta figure yourself out.
You got to figure it out. Like we're not really dealing with that though. So you know what I mean? Like so, yeah, I would say Man Child of Promised Land, one, because it's a seminal writing, and two, Children of Ham is just a really, really, really interesting story about what it meant to grow up in that time. So that would be my own.
That's dope. I'm going to put that on the list. And I feel like that's the one thing I will tip my hat to my 9th grade English teacher, whom I bitterly resisted their overtures to read more fiction and other things because I refused. I took my strike against the racist superstructure by refusing to comply with what they wanted me to read or how they wanted me to read it. But it's something that with books, like when you start reading, right? It's like, and then you find somebody that you like or read something that you like, and then you find like something else they wrote.
Yeah.
Right. That you start to get to see more. Because I used to, I remember, and it's something we still elevate writers today. I think we elevate academic writers more, I think, than maybe a previous time in U.S. history. Like, at least that's how I feel. I mean, or like journalistic, that kind of, like, I don't feel like we make a big deal necessarily in the public sphere, at least until it becomes a TV show about or a series or something about like fiction, you know what I mean, or creative writing and literature type writing. But in any event, but you read enough of somebody's work, if you read like the best thing somebody ever wrote, you know what I mean, you may be like, man, it's intimidating, like to think about. But then you read some other stuff they wrote that's not bad, but it's not as good as the best thing they wrote. You're like, okay, actually, you have a palette, a platter of creation, right? And then there's a diversity of thought, and maybe you read something that you really liked by them. Then you read something by them, you're like, I already know where they was going with that.
Right.
like what was they on? You know what I'm saying? And then you can kind of piece together sort of a broader picture of them as an artist, but then also a broader picture of sort of the world that they existed in. You know what I'm saying? That these were the these were the topics of the day. You know what I mean? And then even when you read something from a different time in the country, or in our society, you get a sense of like, this was the sensibilities of that time, right? And now, 20 years from now, 30 years, 40 years, 100 years, you're like, oh, some parts of this seems, why would anyone ever think that? You know what I'm saying? But it's like, well, that's what people was thinking. I don't know why. Like, that's just what it was. Like, so within, you're not, I don't know, because we can sometimes approach even this modern conversation around, structural societal change as if it's a new conversation, or like someone just discovered we just figured out that this thing isn't working. Get out of here. For real.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And it's like, actually there's a whole body of knowledge of like people critiquing or questioning in different ways. Also, though, talking about the human experience and the human condition. But you may just not have been, tapped into it for whatever reason. So I always find that dope. So Claude Brown, Man Child in the Promised Land was one of my favorites.
Yeah, and Children of Ham, again, like it's like he was speaking from a different place. It's like sometimes we put this on performers. Mm-hmm. You caught them when they were dealing with nothing but their feelings and emotions, and then like you want them to do a fourth album about their feelings and emotions. Right. They're rich. It's different.
Right. They feel different about their feelings and emotions.
They feel different about their feelings and emotions. So respect how they feel now versus how you want them to feel for like the first album energy, right? Mm-hmm. Like, which is, not to go too far, but like the hip hop idea of like everyone's best album is always their first one, right? Mm-hmm. And so we've gotten into that. So we have bought into this idea that like the first album and the best album has to be the first one someone came up with. That's not true.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, and I would argue a lot of artists, even though we don't talk about it, their first album was not their best one. But that's a different story. Like Public Enemy, Say What You Want. It's like, okay, Yo Bum vs. Show was a good project. It Takes the Nation Millions to Hold Us Back is a seminal project, right? Like,
it's a whole nother level. It's a whole
nother level. And so we shouldn't, I even debate with people, frankly. I like 3 Feet High and Rising, but De La Soul is Dead.
Oh, no, De La Soul is Dead is better.
It's a better album.
It's just better.
It's just a better album, right?
It's better in every way. Every time I went in a deep De La dive where I was just listening a lot, and I was like, damn, this is a good ass album. It is banging.
Yeah. Like it's just a better album. There's no other way to really talk about it, right? But we lock people into this like your first expression was like this new fresh expression, right? And we can't get any better. I think it's changing a little bit, but I would still say we're always looking for like that breakout concept. But yeah, my fault.
No, you good. So, on the third lane, and I went, something that you learned something from, maybe on an unusual angle or something that wouldn't normally come up, in this space. And I went through, thought a couple different things. I got one and then I'm gonna call it a bonus. So the one was actually it's a cookbook called QuestLove, and it's a brother out of DC, and he now I think he just bakes cakes and stuff for a living, but the book is like baking cakes from scratch. I read cookbooks. I read all kinds of books. I've been hardwired, some may say brainwashed by my mother's usage of the public space and the free public spaces as forms of entertainment for me and my brother as young children, that, like all those programs that are like, yeah, take the kids to the library, let them pick their own books, and like how that'll make it. So therefore, I've been doing that since I guess that started. And therefore, in my mind, if you want to do something fun, you'll grab some books, right? So, or learn something. And, as a cookbook goes, and I want to give props. It was actually a gift to a family member, and then I started reading it because I was like, oh man, I want to learn how to. I like cakes. I want to be able to make them from scratch. I don't really know how to do it. And the brothers breaks it down, and he talks about the crumb and the ingredients mix and like stuff you could put in, stuff you could take out, things you could replace if if you're vegan or you don't do this or you don't do that. You know what I'm saying? And I was like, because baking is chemistry. It's applied chemistry. Like people don't think about it that way, but that's what it is. You got to get the precise proportions. You got to get the heat right. The vessel can impact the performance and the outcome and all kinds of things. And you got to be mindful of what you're putting in if it's going to cook the way you think it's going to cook. And, it's delicious. And then, allow me to learn how to, to expand my culinary repertoire. And, I guess that's what you're supposed to do with a cookbook. But, I mean, the angle I'm thinking that is unusual is that usually when people, learn, people don't look at cookbooks as like great works of of creative endeavor, I think sometimes, but a real dope cookbook depending on what's in there can help you expand. I mean, I know especially when I first ventured off to the world of plant-based eating as it's called now, but not eating meat as it was more referred to then. Looking in to see how you make other stuff beyond like steaming some vegetables and put salt on them, you know what I'm saying? To really have a repertoire to, and seeing how other food is made, right? And I just think that anything that helps you, that you can access it and then you can leave with a skill that you can like do something in your life is a healthy meditative experience. So it's QuestLove, and let me say the author. I think it's Greg Warren Brown. Warren Brown is the author. Yeah, I think he did something else for a living, but liked baking cakes, and then he got real into baking cakes, and then he stopped doing whatever he was doing for a living and selling and baking cakes. Then and there it is, black man.
If I knew you was coming out of baked cake,
you know what I'm saying?
but no, I agree with you. I agree, and I think to get into this conversation of like what's appropriate, and then what does it mean when the parameters are set about what you think is appropriate, like getting into baking, right? And so in our society, in some ways, you have this idea that like to bake is to like really want the best for someone, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like to just cook fast or cook something is okay. Look at my self-aggrandizement, right? Like, here's what I want you to eat of mine. But when I bake for you, I care for you, right? And it starts to deal with these gender issues and just a whole host of issues, right? That come from this idea of like, okay, a man barbecues, but he doesn't bake.
Mm-hmm.
So he's dealing with the same element, which is flame, right? Because it's the same element, right? You're baking, flames, right? Barbecuing, flames. But we call one dominant and one not so much, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, so for me, and this third one, it's interesting. It's a sister, Janaea Solomon, who we've known for some time, nationally recognized for arts, nonprofit arts management and other things. We've worked together for a long time, and I was doing some work with Policy Link and Gare and some folks, and she made a point that people who are not in, like people who are in government or what people consider like the hard sciences should read poetry. Because it opens up a different way of seeing the world than how your brain thinks about it. And I started trying, and I started realizing how powerful the idea of poetry really is, and how so many of us stop reading it in college, right? Because we're like, okay, I ain't reading that shit no more. Whereas like, no, there's so much to what you can learn from just engaging this idea of poetry. So poetry is like the place where I've received actually a lot of benefit recently. You know what I mean? Seeing the world differently, thinking about the world differently, and thinking about what the world means when you're not framing it exclusively in the manner that you've used to been kind of framing the world. And so been reading Amiri Baraka, particularly one called War Stories that talks about politics and also his experience with running, which is interesting. And then also going back to Sonia Sanchez, which was poetry from my childhood that I got back into, you know, kind of given the space that we're in. I knew I had to like, okay, how can I start to engage, again, different things that don't like limit how I see the world, but it lets my brain kind of like think differently. Yeah. So, yeah, but poetry is something that recently has been a thing. And, yeah, so one of the things I wanted to share real fast was this, again, like Amiri Baraka from like War Stories. And, you know, just a story of like, what does it mean to run with other people than by yourself? You know what I mean? And so this is really interesting that, you know, again, Amiri Baraka, as so accomplished of a writer, also talked about these very human things. Because sometimes when we think about him and different people, we also think about when they drop something so deep that like it was beyond the rest of us, versus like they talked about the range of the human experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
So I was actually had well, I bought it a while back. I had like a collected works of Nikki Giovanni, and there's a particular poem in there, and I recently actually had a Black Men Reads kind of drawn. You know, I was like, man, can I read some poetry instead of instead of like a kid's book or something like that? Because that was something, you know, as you know, mind of my mind. You know what I'm saying? It was like there's a value here that, you know, I think we can, like, if you're not into poetry, you can get detached from, and to those that might be listening, they're going, well, you know, hip hop is like like, yes, it is, but it's a different kind of poetry. Like, you know what I'm saying? And it's good to be and touch base with both of those, because there's themes and there's a conversation about like how you see things, how you're feeling, you know, the questions you're asking, the answers you're giving, that I think if when you you know, a good sitting with a little bit of poetry and you some of them you read and you maybe it doesn't do nothing for you, you don't totally grasp, you know, it just doesn't hit, you know, and then other ones that hit and you're like, oh man, you know what I'm saying? And then some is always the, you know, what's the story behind this piece of work? You know what I mean? What was that person going through, or was there something else happening that inspired them? So yeah, I see that. I appreciate that. It's dope. I have to put some, put some links in. And I think we all could do with. I mean, I don't know if we all need poetry readings. Maybe we do. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I ain't against it. I go to one. You know what I'm saying? I go to anything right now.
I mean, but that's
be safe.
But that's the thing. Like, what does it mean to have a moment? Like, so we have times where we'll be like, yo, I'm about to go watch some shit I know is never going to happen, right? I'm going to go watch laser beams and shit that never will happen. I'm about to go watch somebody that turns to an ant, right? And somebody else that turns into a 10-foot, large person, right? Someone else has a hammer that they can swing no matter where it's at and it comes back to themselves, right?
Right.
when you start to think about all this stuff separately, it starts to sound silly, right? But you go to engage in a world that's not your world and to get something deeper.
Mm-hmm.
Why not poetry? Right? Like you get these broader contours and these broader ethics, right? From watching stuff that you know is not real. There's no one in a hockey mask, right? There's no one in a bad 80s sweater and a bad fisherman hat.
Right.
You, right? But it doesn't stop you from going, right? So much of the, like you told me, Octavia Butler, right? There's so much of that you know is not happening, but it speaks to larger elements of the human experience. And in the same way that poetry can just give it a chance and don't try to take it as like it makes you weird. It just makes you doing something that from the way you heard things is different than the way you would hear it, right? Because we're neurons fire, they wire, right? So you've been used to hearing the stuff you think. That's why if you like Oscar Mayer hot dogs, you don't keep eating them because you like them. It's fine.
Indeed.
But don't just, you know what I'm saying, somebody want to offer you a truffle, don't be angry at them. Your neurons are fired to receive that stimuli, where sometimes a different stimuli opens up different possibilities. So that's what I think about poetry. Sonia Sanchez, Nikki Giovanni, Amiri Baraka, Tony K. Bombara, so I do think there's a canon of our art that also has to be respected, because right now there's certain artists, like everyone loves Baldwin, right? Everyone loves Art the Lord, right? And it's political, which is totally fine. But like you have different artists, and even crazy ass Stanley Crouch, right? like we talked about, but people will throw him off or cancel him because of what he became, not because of his talent as a writer, right? And his talent as a writer, talking about a form of the Black experience, should not be downplayed just because he came to be a person that you don't understand why he could come to be that person.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely, I think, something that's been a theme this week with, I guess coming out of last week and this week with the Ice Cube and the Baba the Whoop. And I guess it's a theme every election cycle. And for our own internal dialogue, like how do we manage the spread of our thought, so to speak, as it then filters down into practice, and that the idea that we can be in a challenging dynamic with each other, and we may want to separate, and then we may push ourselves to even go, no, not only do I want to separate from that person, I'm going to totally delegitimize anything that they have to say, but also anything that they are. And I think there's a place that I want to try to work to, where, and it's not just the we can differ on politics, but still be, it's not that surface thing that people are saying. It's to me, it's a thing of really thinking about, like, at your root, you are a person, and whatever things you're sharing, there's something there, kind of like we talked about your cousin Kanye, or so to speak, that might be on to something. So let me not just, it especially if I can afford, if my health and safety can allow me the space to let you, sit over here in the corner, or let me thumb through something that one of your works, and not just be let me experience what you're thinking and saying, and then go, okay, I take this part out, this part, no, that part, you're kind of talking crazy, what I'm saying, and not just dismiss it all, or throw it all down the drain. And I think that within the context of some of the day-to-day, especially in the serial sort of periodical kind of way that we experience media largely and are enticed to experience media, which is like headlines and clips and snippets and, you know what I mean? And, oh, this conversation and let me pull back from that lens and let me just like go a little deeper and sit with it. And then maybe I won't have no comments. Maybe I don't have a comment like to follow up. I don't have to go, run and make a post about it somewhere. But let me sit with it and then ask myself when the deeper, challenging things come, is there something that I might have gained in perspective from like experiencing your worldview? And I don't have a fully formed idea of how we operationalize that behavior. But I think it's something that is lacking in some of the means that we do a lot of our dialogue in. Is like, it's like you got to get on brand, you got to get on message, you got to get on. And it's like sometimes I just need to sit and let it sort of wash over me a little bit and swim around. And
you know what my man say? Let the dirt wash over you. Dave Chappelle.
Sir.
Let the dirt wash. But I think you're right. I think sometimes the idea of someone's correctness is a longitudinal project, right? The idea of someone being correct is longitudinal. It's not tomorrow, right? There's some stuff someone's going to say or do, and tomorrow it's not going to make sense, and maybe in a year it does, or vice versa. Mm-hmm. Think about all the songs that came out that sounded like other people's songs that today you won't want to listen to because you could just listen to the first song.
Right.
So I don't have to listen to like, oh man, what's the guy? Cellar Dwellers, right? And they were okay. They weren't bad. But like, I don't listen to Cellar Dwellers if I listen to Smith the Wesson.
Right. I listen to
Smith the Wesson, right? But like, I'm sure it was the immediate thing to make a song that sounded like the most popular song at that time. Right. But now on the flip side, there are people who made songs that sounded like other people's songs that made genius music. Right. And it wasn't popular until later.
Yeah.
Black jazz records. If anyone, gets a chance to like really comb through their stuff, they made amazing music. And it wasn't popular music of that time, even though they were good artists, or as a song unique would say, good artists. Right. Like, but like, so the thing is, sometimes people make decisions and you look like a genius later. Sometimes you look like a fool. Sometimes you do a little bit of both, right? I saw an outfit I had on the other day from an old recording. Man, that was bad. and not bad meaning good either. That was I don't know what the fuck. Man, I don't know what I was like, yeah, man, we're whatever. So, but my point is like, we have to give that chance for growth, right? And sit with perspectives and sit with vantage points, right? And not dismiss them out of hand, even though I get why it feels good to. And in the short term, it feels like it's not relevant. But guys, this has been an interesting travel through the mind, as we say, right? Like,
yes, sir.
And I appreciate us not having to talk about some shit that we don't want to talk about.
We'll talk about that right now.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like that's just it's something to be said for like, what are we talking about? Not the thing that you think we're talking about.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
But that's a testament to your work. So thank you.
Oh, well, peace, God. So with that, I'm gonna say to you, the listener, I'll make sure to document. I think I got all the names down, at least those that in the show notes. But go out, either buy a book or hit your public library and expand your mind. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So with that, I'm gonna say peace.
Peace.
Thank you for listening to Good Brothers. Thank you to my good brother, Majestic. Thank you for listening and engaging with the show. You can find Ask Your Oldhead and Good Brothers and all future and to come Ask Your Oldhead related podcasts at askyouroldhead.com. You can search it on Apple Music, Spotify, Radio Public, Google Podcasts, you name it, Stitcher, even SoundCloud. The podcast is made regularly and produced by myself, and all the audio and recording is done by me as well. And we do this out as a labor of love and an ongoing project to define and see how we see the world and how we move through the world, and hopefully you can take something from our experience. Also, you can support the podcast by becoming a patron on Patreon. Every little bit helps keep this thing running. It provides me the economic space to cover the cost to keep this content going, keep this art up as we figure out where our future lies. In all things, it's election season, so please be safe. You will find at least the titles and some links to the books that we discussed this week. So feel free to grab one of those and give us some feedback if you've never read them, or if something that we talked about is one of your favorites. In any event, I appreciate you.